My name is Davis. I'm 34 years old, and I've built a real estate empire in Boston that my family never saw coming. Growing up, my parents always made it clear that my brother Aaron was the golden child. When they gave him $15,000 for a house down payment and mockingly suggested I should try renting, I smiled, walked away, and made a decision that changed everything. What they didn't know was that I was already planning my first property purchase. Before I share how my parents finally discovered my success, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever had family underestimate your potential. I grew up in a comfortable middle-class neighborhood in Brookline, just outside Boston. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was in a good school district, which my parents reminded us was for our future. My father Robert worked as an accountant at a respected firm downtown, while my mom Diane taught second grade at the local elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable and respected in the community. From my earliest memories, it was clear that my brother Aaron, who's 2 years older than me, was viewed differently. He was the kind of kid who brought home perfect report cards without seeming to try. Math, science, English, everything came naturally to him. By third grade, he was already in the gifted program, and teachers would often stop my parents after school to gush about his potential. "Your Aaron is going places," they'd say, while I stood there feeling invisible. I wasn't a bad student, mostly B's with some A's, and the occasional C, but in our house, that might as well have been failing. Every time Aaron brought home another perfect test, it went straight to the refrigerator. My projects and achievements rarely made it to that hallowed space. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became the unofficial family motto. Sometimes they said it directly. Other times it was implied through sighs and disappointed looks. The thing is, I had other interests. While Aaron was winning science fairs, I was setting up little businesses. At 9, I started a neighborhood car washing service. At 12, I was buying candy in bulk and selling it at school for a profit until a teacher shut me down. At 15, I was fixing and flipping bicycles from yard sales. My parents viewed these ventures as distractions. "Playing store," my father called it. "That's cute, Davis, but you need to focus on school if you want a real future," my mother would add, usually while helping Aaron with applications for academic summer camps they happily paid for. High school only widened the gap between us. Aaron was valedictorian, president of the debate team, and got accepted to Princeton with a partial scholarship. The day his acceptance letter arrived, my parents threw a party and invited the extended family. My Uncle Patrick slapped me on the back during that celebration and said, "Big shoes to fill, huh, Davis?" I just nodded and refilled the chip bowl. Meanwhile, I was working at the local hardware store after school and on weekends. I liked learning the business, how pricing worked, inventory management, what customers needed. The store owner, Frank, noticed my interest and started teaching me about margins and overhead. These were lessons that fascinated me far more than calculus. After graduation, our paths diverged further. Aaron went to Princeton as planned. I took some business classes at the community college while working full-time. This decision was met with thinly veiled disappointment from my parents. "Community college is a start," my mother said, emphasis on the last word, implying I was already behind. Family gatherings became exercises in humiliation. Thanksgiving conversations centered around Aaron's achievements, his internship at a prestigious firm, the professor who was mentoring him, the connections he was making. When relatives would finally remember to ask about me, my parents often answered before I could. "Davis is still figuring things out," my father would say, as if my life was a problem to be solved. There was the Christmas when Aaron came home junior year and announced he'd been accepted into a competitive finance internship for the summer. "That's my boy," Dad exclaimed, pouring Aaron an extra glass of wine despite him being underage. 10 minutes later, I mentioned I'd been promoted to assistant manager at the hardware store. "Well," Mom said after an awkward pause, "at least it's steady work." That same night, I overheard my father telling my uncle that the hardware store was fine for now, but he worried about my lack of ambition. I was in the kitchen, helping with dishes. They didn't know I could hear them from around the corner. "He doesn't seem to want more for himself," Dad said, concern in his voice. "Not everyone is cut out for the academic track." my uncle replied sympathetically, as if I had some deficiency. What none of them understood was that I was learning exactly what I wanted. Every customer interaction, every pricing decision, every inventory challenge was teaching me about business in a way no textbook could. I was developing skills and a vision for my future, but it wasn't one they recognized or valued. By the time Aaron graduated from Princeton and landed a job at a financial consulting firm in Boston, the narrative was set in stone. He was the successful son. I was the underachiever still trying to find my way. No amount of hard work or small successes seemed capable of changing that perception. Despite it all, I never gave up on my entrepreneurial dreams. I kept learning, saving, and planning. I knew that someday I would find a way to build something meaningful. I just didn't know yet that it would come from real estate, or that my family's biggest dismissal would become my greatest motivation. It was June, just over 10 years ago, when everything changed. Aaron had received a substantial promotion at his financial consulting firm after just 2 years, and my parents organized a celebratory dinner at Morton's Steakhouse, the kind of place they'd never take me. I almost didn't go. I knew how these family celebrations played out, Aaron in the spotlight, me in the shadows. But some mix of obligation and hope convinced me to show up. The restaurant was upscale, with dark wood paneling and white tablecloths. The kind of place where servers wear bow ties and wine costs more than I made in a day at the hardware store. Mom and Dad had already arrived when I got there, both dressed in their finest. Mom had even gotten her hair done. Aaron showed up 10 minutes after me in a tailored suit that probably cost 2 months of my rent. "There he is," my father announced when Aaron walked in, standing to give him a hug. The man of the hour, the contrast with my own arrival, a quick hello and gesture toward an empty chair, wasn't lost on me. We ordered drinks, and my father immediately proposed a toast. To Aaron, who has always made us proud. This promotion is just the beginning of an amazing career. The meal progressed with Aaron detailing his new responsibilities and salary package. I tried to show genuine interest, asking questions about his work. In truth, some of it was interesting: market analysis, client management, investment strategies. These were subjects relevant to my own interests, though no one at the table seemed to make that connection. As dessert arrived, my parents exchanged a meaningful glance. My father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he began, sliding the envelope across the table to Aaron. "We know with your new position, you'll want to establish yourself properly." Aaron opened the envelope and his eyes widened. "Are you serious? I can't accept this." But his protest was weak, his smile already spreading. "We insist," my mother said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. $15,000 toward a down payment on your first home. We've been saving for this." I nearly choked on my coffee. $15,000 was more than I had in my entire savings account after years of careful budgeting. I knew my parents weren't wealthy. This represented a significant portion of their nest egg. "This is incredible," Aaron said, actually tearing up a little. "Thank you both so much." "Well, you can't keep renting that apartment now that you're an associate director," my father said. "It's time you owned something, build some equity." I sat silently, processing this information. I'd been telling my parents for over a year about my interest in property ownership, not just as a place to live, but as an investment. They had dismissed it as unrealistic every time. Somehow, I found my voice. "That's really generous. I've actually been looking into property investment too. Been saving up and researching neighborhoods with good appreciation potential." There was a moment of silence before my mother patted my hand condescendingly. "Oh, Davis, maybe try renting a nice apartment first? Home ownership is a big responsibility." My father chuckled. "Property investment? You need capital for that, son. And stable income. You need a real career before thinking about real estate." Aaron, perhaps feeling a twinge of discomfort, tried to soften the blow. "It's a tough market to break into. For some," my father added, and they all laughed lightly, as if sharing an inside joke at my expense. I could feel heat rising in my face, not from embarrassment, but from a deep, burning anger I rarely allowed myself to feel toward my family. "Right," I said quietly. Just a thought. The conversation moved on to which neighborhoods Aaron should consider, how much he could afford with his salary plus their gift, and what features he should prioritize. No one asked about my work or plans for the future. When the check came, my father paid without hesitation, another contrast to the times I'd joined them for dinner and been expected to contribute despite earning a fraction of their income. As we walked to the parking lot, Aaron talked excitedly about calling a realtor friend from college the next day. My mother suggested they go house hunting together that weekend. I need to head out, I said when we reached our cars. Early start tomorrow. Of course, my mother said, hardly paying attention. We'll be looking at properties in Beacon Hill on Saturday if you want to join. I smiled politely. Thanks, but I've got plans. No one asked what those plans were. Well, congratulations again, Aaron, I said, extending my hand to my brother. He pulled me into a hug instead. Thanks for coming, Davis. It means a lot. I nodded, said goodnight to my parents, and got into my used Honda Civic, another stark contrast to Aaron's new BMW. The moment I closed the car door, my composure crumbled. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting back the sting of tears. I wasn't jealous of Aaron's success. I was hurt by the blatant favoritism and dismissal of my own dreams and potential. I sat there until they'd all driven away, collecting myself. Then I drove home to my small apartment in Somerville, a much less prestigious address than my brother's place in Back Bay. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the dinner in my mind, the casual dismissal of my ambitions, the $15,000 gift that would never have been offered to me. Around 3 a.m, I got up and opened my laptop. If my family wouldn't believe in me, I'd have to believe in myself. I started researching real estate markets in depth, looking at foreclosures, studying financing options for people without family support or huge savings. I read about creative approaches to breaking into property ownership. Something shifted in me that night. The need for my parents' approval fell away, replaced by determination. I would build something on my own terms, without their help or blessing. And I wouldn't tell them about it, until there was no way they could diminish what I'd accomplished. Looking back, I should almost thank them for that dinner. Their dismissal of my goals became the fuel that drove me forward. That night was the beginning of my real education. Not in a classroom, but in the school of proving everyone wrong. The Monday after that fateful dinner, I walked into work at the hardware store with a new sense of purpose. I'd spent the weekend researching real estate and had come to a conclusion. I needed to get inside the industry to learn it properly. Selling hammers and paint wasn't going to get me there. After my shift, instead of going home, I drove to a local real estate office I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. The sign said Boston Harbor Realty, a mid-sized agency with a decent reputation. I straightened my shirt, walked in without an appointment, and asked to speak to whoever was in charge about employment opportunities. I got lucky. The office manager, Linda, had just lost an administrative assistant and was buried in paperwork. My lack of real estate experience was a concern, but my eagerness and availability convinced her to give me a shot at the front desk. The pay was actually less than I made at the hardware store, but that wasn't the point. This was an investment in my future. I gave notice at the store that same day. My first few weeks at Boston Harbor Realty were humbling. I answered phones, filed paperwork, and made coffee. But I also absorbed everything. I listened to agents discuss properties, watched how deals came together and fell apart, and studied the multiple listing service whenever I had downtime. I stayed late every day, volunteering to help agents organize open houses or prepare marketing materials. Most ignored me or saw me as convenient free labor, but one agent was different. Jackson Miller was in his 50s, a veteran in the Boston real estate market who'd seen it all. One evening, he caught me studying expired listings after hours. "What are you looking for in those?" he asked, startling me. "Patterns," I admitted. "I'm trying to see if there are common factors in properties that don't sell." He raised his eyebrows, pulled up a chair, and started pointing out things I'd missed. That was the beginning of an informal mentorship that would change everything for me. Jackson became my real estate Yoda. He'd built his business from nothing after a career change in his 30s. Unlike the other agents who chased luxury listings, Jackson specialized in modest properties in transitioning neighborhoods. He had an eye for potential where others saw problems. Real estate isn't about selling dream homes to rich people, he told me once. It's about understanding value where others don't see it. After 3 months at the front desk, I asked Linda if I could study for my real estate license. She agreed, as long as it didn't interfere with my work. I started studying at night and on weekends, sacrificing what little social life I had. My parents, meanwhile, had helped Aaron find a beautiful brownstone in Beacon Hill. He'd combined their gift with his substantial savings and income to buy a place that I couldn't have afforded in my wildest dreams. I was invited to the housewarming party but made an excuse not to go. I couldn't bear another round of comparisons and condescension. 6 months after starting at the agency, I passed the exam and became a licensed real estate agent. Linda allowed me to start showing properties on weekends while keeping my administrative role. My first few months as an agent were tough. I had no sphere of influence, no past clients, and was competing with established agents for business. But I had Jackson's guidance and my own determination. I specialized in helping first-time buyers with limited budgets find value in overlooked neighborhoods. I worked harder than anyone else, taking clients out at all hours, researching properties extensively before showings, and being brutally honest about both potential and problems. Slowly, I started making sales. Each commission went straight into my savings account. I continued living in my small apartment, driving my old car, and eating budget meals. Every dollar was earmarked for my future real estate investment. Jackson watched my progress with interest. One day, over coffee, he made a suggestion that accelerated everything. "There's a foreclosure in Dorchester I think you should look at," he said casually. "Two-family house. Needs work. But the numbers might make sense." The property was a disaster aesthetically, peeling paint, outdated kitchens, overgrown yard, but structurally sound. The asking price was $180,000, well below market value, even considering the condition. If renovated, it could be worth $300,000 or more, and the rental income from one unit could cover most of the mortgage. There was just one problem. I had saved about $20,000, nowhere near enough for a conventional down payment plus renovation costs. "I might have a solution," Jackson said when I explained my financial situation. "I've been looking to diversify my investments. What if I put up 70% of the cash needed? You put in 30% and sweat equity on the renovation, and we split the ownership 60-40. It wasn't ideal. I wanted to own 100% of my first property, but it was a foot in the door. We shook hands and started putting together the deal. I was terrified throughout the entire closing process. What if I'd misjudged the renovation costs? What if we couldn't find tenants? What if the neighborhood declined instead of improving as we predicted? But on a cold January morning, almost exactly 1 year after that painful dinner where my parents had given Aaron his down payment, I signed the final papers and became a property owner. Jackson and I toasted with coffee in paper cups as we stood in our empty, rundown acquisition. "Welcome to real estate investing," he said. "Now the real work begins." That night, I almost called my parents to share the news. My finger hovered over my phone for a full minute before I put it down. No, I decided. This was just the beginning. I would prove myself not with words but with results they couldn't dismiss or diminish. Instead, I opened a new spreadsheet and started planning the renovation in detail. The path to proving them wrong would be long, but for the first time, I could see it clearly ahead of me. 1 year after purchasing that first property with Jackson, I stood in the fully renovated kitchen and could hardly believe the transformation. What had once been a neglected disaster was now a charming two-family home with updated systems, refinished hardwood floors, and modern kitchens and bathrooms. The renovation process had been brutal. I worked my regular job at the real estate office during the day, then headed to the property every evening and weekend. I learned to do basic demolition, painting, and tile work to save on labor costs, hiring professionals only for the specialized jobs like electrical and plumbing. There were countless moments of doubt. The first major setback came when we discovered knob and tube wiring throughout the house, adding $8,000 to our budget. Then a pipe burst during a cold snap, flooding the downstairs unit. Each problem tested my resolve, but I pushed through. We found tenants for both units within 2 weeks of completing the renovation. The rental income covered the mortgage with $500 left over each month, which we split according to our ownership percentages. My share wasn't much, but it represented something profound: income from an asset rather than trading time for money. Jackson was impressed with my work ethic and the quality of the renovation. "You've got an eye for this," he told me. "Most first-timers cut corners or over-improve. You found the sweet spot." Meanwhile, my real estate career was gaining momentum. I had a growing client list and my commissions were increasing. Between my job and my share of the rental income, I was saving money faster than ever before. When my parents called to check in occasionally, I kept conversations brief and vague. They mentioned Aaron's promotion to senior associate and his plans to renovate his kitchen with high-end appliances. I congratulated him sincerely, but shared nothing about my own property ventures. 18 months after our first purchase, Jackson approached me with another opportunity, a small 3-unit building in an adjacent neighborhood that was beginning to attract young professionals. The owner was retiring and moving to Florida, motivated to sell quickly. This time I had enough saved for a 25% down payment on my own. But Jackson proposed a different arrangement. "Let's use the equity we've built in the first property," he suggested. "We can do a cash-out refinance based on the increased value, use that for the down payment, and keep our capital for renovations." It was a strategy I'd read about but hadn't considered possible so soon. The appraisal came in at $320,000, almost double what we'd paid. We refinanced, pulled out $60,000 in equity, and used it as the down payment on the 3-unit building. Just like that, my real estate portfolio doubled. The second renovation went smoother than the first, as I now had established relationships with contractors and suppliers. We finished under budget and ahead of schedule, then filled all 3 units with qualified tenants within a month. As my real estate knowledge deepened, I began seeing opportunities everywhere. I joined local investor groups, attended workshops, and built a network of contacts in the industry. My name began circulating among property owners looking to sell without listing publicly. This led to my third acquisition, a single-family home in a transitioning neighborhood that I purchased entirely on my own. It needed minimal work and was perfect as a rental. I used a conventional mortgage, putting 20% down from my savings. Around this time, I established an LLC to hold my properties and provide some legal protection. This became important as I began to see real estate not just as a side hustle but as a business with growth potential. My fourth property came through a tip from a contractor who knew an elderly owner needed to sell quickly for health reasons. I negotiated a fair price that worked for both of us, secured private financing through an investor I'd met at a networking event, and closed in just 3 weeks. While my portfolio grew, my family remained completely unaware. At holiday gatherings, I still received the same condescending questions about my real estate job, always with the implication that I was just helping richer, more successful people buy homes rather than building wealth myself. "Davis is still selling houses," my mother would tell relatives, with the same tone she might use to say I was still flipping burgers. My father would invariably add, "It's commission-based, so it's up and down," emphasizing the perceived instability of my career choice compared to Aaron's corporate position. What they didn't know was that by this point, my rental income alone exceeded my brother's salary. My net worth, while largely illiquid, had surpassed both his and my parents combined. But I kept this information closely guarded. The secret was becoming harder to maintain. I moved from my small apartment to a comfortable condo that I purchased as my primary residence. I replaced my old Honda with a new Toyota 4Runner, nice but not flashy enough to raise eyebrows. I began investing in better clothes and occasionally treating myself to good restaurants. When my mother commented on my new watch during a visit, I simply said business had been good lately. She nodded without much interest and changed the subject to Aaron's company stock options. The most challenging part of my double life was the emotional toll. There were moments of intense pride I couldn't share, like when a property appraised for $50,000 more than projected, or when I helped a struggling single mother find housing in one of my buildings at a reduced rate. There were also moments of loneliness. Success without acknowledgement can feel hollow sometimes. I dated occasionally, but found it difficult to let people get close when such a significant part of my life remained hidden from my family. The turning point came with my fifth property, a 6-unit apartment building that represented a major leap in scale and complexity. The purchase price was $750,000, requiring substantial financing and a carefully planned renovation strategy. I partnered with 2 other investors I'd met through Jackson, each bringing different strengths to the project. One had construction management experience, the other specialized in finance. Together, we formed a new LLC specifically for this project. This property wasn't just another rental, it was a statement. After renovation, its value would exceed $1 million, and my 1/3 ownership represented the culmination of years of work, learning, and disciplined saving. The day we closed on the building, one of my partners took a photo of the 3 of us in front of the property and posted it on LinkedIn with a caption highlighting the project. It didn't occur to me that this casual social media post would eventually shatter my carefully maintained secret. For now, though, I was too focused on the work ahead to worry about discovery. The property needed extensive renovation, including a new roof, updated electrical systems, and complete kitchen and bathroom remodels in all 6 units. We projected 6 months of work before it would be ready for tenants. As I walked through the empty building with my partners, planning our approach, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment tinged with an unexpected sadness. I had built something significant, something that proved my parents wrong about me in every way, but they had no idea. Part of me wanted to show them, to force them to acknowledge my success, but another part, perhaps the wiser part, knew that external validation wasn't what had gotten me here. So I kept my secret a while longer, continuing to play the role of the less successful son, while quietly building an empire they couldn't imagine. 3 years into my real estate journey, with 5 properties in my portfolio and a growing reputation in Boston investment circles, I found myself dreading the annual Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. These family gatherings had become exercises in restraint, biting my tongue as my achievements were dismissed while errands were celebrated. This particular Thanksgiving promised to be especially challenging. Aaron had recently been made the youngest partner at his firm, an accomplishment my parents had been broadcasting to anyone who would listen for weeks. I arrived intentionally late to minimize pre-dinner small talk, bringing an expensive bottle of wine that no one commented on. The house was already full. My parents, Aaron and his girlfriend, Melissa, my Aunt Judith and Uncle Thomas, and my grandmother, Eleanor. "There he is," my father called out when I walked in. "We were just talking about Aaron's new partnership. Isn't it something?" "Congratulations," I said sincerely to my brother. Despite our parents' comparative treatment, I never resented Aaron himself. He worked hard and deserved his success. "Thanks, man," Aaron replied, seeming genuinely pleased to see me. The conversation immediately returned to Aaron's accomplishment, with my father explaining the significance to my uncle for what was clearly not the first time. "Youngest partner in the firm's history," he emphasized, beaming with pride. During dinner, the interrogation began, as it always did. "So Davis," my Aunt Judith asked, "are you still selling houses?" "I'm in real estate, yes," I answered carefully. "How's the market these days?" my uncle inquired, in the tone people use when they can't think of anything else to ask. "It's strong in certain segments," I replied. "Investment properties are moving quickly," my father interjected. "Davis has been showing a lot of condos lately, right, son?" It wasn't true. I hadn't shown a property in months, focusing instead on my investment business, but I just nodded. "Speaking of property," my mother said, turning to Aaron, "tell everyone about your kitchen renovation." Aaron launched into a detailed description of his $40,000 kitchen remodel, complete with imported Italian marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. My parents asked questions that allowed him to elaborate on every expensive detail. When dessert was served, my father raised his glass. "I'd like to toast Aaron's partnership. Your mother and I always knew you were destined for greatness." Everyone clinked glasses. No one seemed to notice that my smile didn't reach my eyes. "And we have more news," my mother added excitedly. "We've decided to help Aaron and Melissa with the down payment on a vacation property in Cape Cod." I nearly choked on my pie. After the $15,000 gift years earlier, they were now helping him buy a second home while still believing I was barely making ends meet. That's incredibly generous, I managed to say. Well, they work so hard, my mother replied. Everyone needs a place to decompress. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee, my grandmother pulled me aside. Unlike my parents, she had always treated Aaron and me equally. "How are you really doing, Davis?" she asked quietly. For a moment, I was tempted to tell her everything, the properties, the income, the success I'd achieved on my own. But the living room wasn't the place for such revelations. "I'm doing well, Grandma. Better than they think." She patted my hand knowingly. "I've always thought you had a good head for business. Your grandfather was the same way. Quiet ambition." Our conversation was interrupted by my father calling everyone's attention to look at photos of Aaron's new office with its harbor view. Later, as the gathering wound down, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. "Davis, your father and I were talking," she began, her voice taking on the concerned tone I'd come to dread. "We know real estate can be unpredictable. If you ever want to explore other options." Aaron mentioned his firm is expanding their client relations department. "With your people skills, you might fit in well there." The irony was almost too much to bear. They were offering to help me get an entry-level position at my brother's firm while I was building a real estate portfolio worth millions. "I appreciate the thought," I said neutrally, "but I'm committed to real estate." She sighed. "Well, the offer's there if you change your mind. We just worry about your future." As I drove home that night, I struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to continue proving myself without their knowledge or support. Another part was growing tired of the charade. The following month, I closed on my fifth property, the 6-unit apartment building. The renovation was progressing well, ahead of schedule and on budget. My business partners and I were already discussing our next potential acquisition. During a site visit, Mark, one of my partners, suggested we document the transformation for our marketing materials. We took photos throughout the building, and he asked if I'd mind appearing in some of them to give scale to the spaces. "We should highlight the team behind this success," he said. "People invest in people, not just properties." I agreed without giving it much thought. The photos turned out well, professional-looking shots of us examining plans, discussing details with contractors, and standing proudly in front of the building. Mark used these images in a press release about the project that was picked up by the Boston Business Journal. The article wasn't major news, just a small piece about urban property revitalization, but it included my full name and a brief profile of each partner. I didn't think much about it until 3 days later when I nearly ran into my parents at a restaurant. I was having dinner with potential investors when I spotted them across the room, thankfully before they saw me. I asked to be moved to a more private table and managed to leave without an encounter. It was a close call that made me realize how complicated my double life had become. Boston wasn't that big, and as my business grew, so did the chances of my secret being discovered. What I didn't realize was that discovery was already inevitable. The article, the LinkedIn post, and my increasing visibility in real estate circles had created a digital trail that was just waiting to be found. The question wasn't if my family would discover the truth, but when, and how they would react to learning that the son they had underestimated had built something substantial without their knowledge or approval. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in April, almost 5 years after that painful dinner where my parents had given Aaron $15,000 for his down payment. I was in a meeting with contractors at our latest property when my phone began vibrating repeatedly in my pocket, 3 missed calls from my mother in 5 minutes. When it immediately started ringing again, I excused myself and stepped outside. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Davis." Her voice sounded strange, a mixture of confusion and something else I couldn't identify. "I need to ask you something." "Sure, what is it?" I was mentally running through possibilities, health issues, family emergency. I was looking up a recipe online and decided to Google that chef you mentioned last time we had dinner, she began, which immediately struck me as odd since I couldn't recall mentioning any chef. "Anyway, your name came up in the search results. Something about a real estate development company." My stomach dropped. The moment I'd both feared and secretly anticipated had arrived. Are you involved with a company called Beacon Property Partners? She asked. I took a deep breath. Yes, I am. I'm one of the founding partners. There was a long pause. The article I found says you've completed several major renovation projects in Boston. It mentioned a portfolio of properties. That's correct, I said, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with apprehension. Davis, what is going on? Why haven't you told us about any of this? I looked at my watch. This wasn't a conversation to have while standing on a sidewalk with limited time. Mom, I'm in the middle of a meeting with contractors. Can I come over tonight around 7 and we can talk about it properly? Your father and I need to understand what's happening, she insisted. Aaron will be here too. Of course Aaron would be there. I'll see you at 7, I agreed. Then ended the call and tried to collect myself before returning to my meeting. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I kept rehearsing what I would say, how I would explain not just my business success, but my decision to keep it from them. By the time I pulled up to my parents' house that evening, I still didn't have a perfect answer. They were waiting for me in the living room, Mom, Dad, and Aaron, arranged like a panel of judges. The atmosphere was tense, as if I'd been caught in some terrible deception rather than building a successful business. Sit down, son, my father said, gesturing to the chair facing them. I remained standing. Actually, I think I'll stand for this. My mother held her iPad, open to what appeared to be the Boston Business Journal article. We've been reading about you online, she said. There are quite a few articles and posts once we started looking. Congratulations on your success, Aaron offered, sounding genuine if confused. Why don't you tell us what's really been going on? My father suggested. His tone wasn't angry, but there was hurt beneath the surface. So I told them everything, starting with that dinner 5 years ago when they'd given Aaron money for a down payment while dismissing my interest in real estate. I explained how that moment had crystallized years of feeling underestimated and pushed me to prove myself. I walked them through each property acquisition, the partnerships I'd formed, and the current value of my portfolio. As I spoke, their expressions transformed from confusion to astonishment. You own 6 properties? My father interrupted, clearly struggling to process this information. 7 now, I corrected him. We closed on a new one last month. But how did you manage the financing? He asked. The down payments alone would be substantial. I explained my strategy of reinvesting profits, using equity from earlier properties to fund new acquisitions, and forming strategic partnerships. The first property was the hardest, I admitted. After that, each one became a building block for the next. My mother had been uncharacteristically quiet. I don't understand why you kept this from us, she finally said, her voice small. We're your family. We would have been proud. I took a deep breath. Would you? Every time I mentioned real estate or investing before, you dismissed it. You suggested I try renting before even thinking about buying. You never took my ambitions seriously. That's not fair, my father protested. We were just being realistic about your prospects at the time. No, I countered. You were comparing me to Aaron and finding me lacking, as you always had. You didn't believe in me, so I stopped needing you to. Aaron shifted uncomfortably. I had no idea you felt this way. It wasn't about you, I assured him. You earned your success. I just needed to find my own path, on my own terms. My parents exchanged glances. I could see them recalibrating their understanding of me in real time. Well, my father said, finally, clearly we underestimated your business acumen. But that's no reason to keep us in the dark for years. We could have helped you. That's exactly why I didn't tell you, I explained. I needed to do this myself, to know that I built something without your connections or money or even approval. My mother was scrolling through more search results on her iPad. It says here your recent project increased property values throughout the neighborhood. You're quoted discussing community investment. She looked up at me with new eyes, seeing me perhaps for the first time as a successful adult, rather than a disappointing comparison to my brother. Davis, my father began, his tone softer now, we always wanted what was best for you. I know you believe that, I replied. But what you thought was best wasn't what I needed or wanted. We talked for nearly 3 hours that night. They asked detailed questions about my business, finally showing the interest they should have years ago. Aaron, to his credit, seemed genuinely impressed and supportive. As the conversation wound down, my mother made a suggestion that illustrated how little had really changed. "You should talk to Aaron about investment strategies now that you have significant assets to manage." I smiled politely but said nothing. Some patterns were too ingrained to break in one evening. The weeks following the revelation were surreal. My parents suddenly wanted to tell everyone about their son, the real estate developer. They mentioned me to friends, neighbors, even strangers, with the same pride they'd always shown for Aaron. At a family gathering the following month, I overheard my father telling relatives about my son Davis's real estate empire, with dramatic embellishments that made me cringe. "He's revitalizing entire neighborhoods," he proclaimed to my bewildered cousin, who had no idea my circumstances had changed. When relatives who had previously barely acknowledged me suddenly showed interest in my investment strategies, I kept my advice vague and generic. I remembered all too well how they had treated me before. The most uncomfortable moment came when my parents' friends started asking if I could help their children get into real estate investing. Davis could mentor them, my mother suggested enthusiastically at a dinner party I'd reluctantly attended. Show them how to get started like he did. She conveniently omitted the part where they had offered no support or encouragement during my most difficult years. I declined these requests politely, but firmly. My success wasn't a family franchise to be distributed, and my journey wasn't a template that could be easily replicated with parental connections. The truth was, despite the newfound recognition, something fundamental remained broken in my relationship with my parents. They were proud of me now, but it was the achievement they valued, not the person. If my business failed tomorrow, I suspected their estimation of me would fall just as quickly as it had risen. Aaron and I, however, began developing a more honest relationship. Over lunch one day, he confessed, "I always got the better deal from them, and I knew it. I should have said something." "It wasn't your responsibility," I told him. "We were kids, and then we were young adults trying to find our way." "Still," he insisted, "I'm sorry." That apology meant more to me than all my parents' belated pride. The months following my family's discovery of my real estate success were a period of adjustment for all of us. I had to establish new boundaries while navigating their sudden interest in a part of my life they'd previously dismissed. After careful consideration, I made several decisions about how to proceed. First, I would maintain my independence from their opinions or involvement in my business. Second, I would be honest but not harsh about our past. And third, I would focus on building healthier relationships moving forward, without dwelling on old resentments. This wasn't easy. My parents, especially my father, kept trying to insert themselves into my business affairs. He suggested properties to purchase, offered unsolicited advice on management, and even tried to connect me with his friends as potential investors. "Dad," I finally said during one such conversation, "I appreciate your interest, but I have a system and team that works for me. I'm not looking for new partners or advisors right now." He seemed wounded. "I'm just trying to help, now that we know what you're doing." "I understand that," I replied carefully, "but I've been doing this successfully for years without input. That doesn't need to change." Setting these boundaries caused tension, but it was necessary. I had built my business on my own terms, and maintaining that independence was crucial to my continuing success. The most significant conversation came 6 months after the discovery. I invited my parents to coffee at a neutral location, not their house or mine, to discuss our relationship honestly. "I want to move forward," I began, "but I need you to understand how damaging it was to constantly be compared to Aaron and found wanting." My mother started to protest, but I held up my hand. "Please let me finish. I'm not saying this to hurt you, but so we can build something healthier." I explained how their dismissal of my interests and abilities had affected me, how I'd internalized their judgment for years before finally breaking free of the need for their approval. "The thing is," I concluded, "I'm proud of what I've built, not just because it's successful, but because I did it my way, following my instincts and interests rather than someone else's definition of success." My father sat quietly for a long moment before speaking. "I never realized we were doing that to you," he said finally. "We thought we were guiding you toward a secure future." "We're so sorry, Davis," my mother added, tears in her eyes. "We should have seen your potential, your different kind of intelligence." Their apology wasn't perfect. It still contained the implication that they hadn't recognized my different abilities, as if they were lesser than academic achievement. But it was sincere. "I accept your apology," I said, "but going forward, I need you to respect my choices and my independence." They agreed, and while old habits occasionally resurfaced, our relationship gradually improved. They learned to ask about my work with genuine interest rather than comparison, and I learned to share aspects of my life without fear of judgment. Meanwhile, my business continued to thrive. The 6-unit building renovation was completed and fully occupied with happy tenants. My partners and I expanded into a new area of Boston that was showing early signs of revitalization. I also began giving back. Drawing on my own experience of building something without support or guidance, I started a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. We provided not just education and networking, but seed funding for promising business plans. One of my first mentees was Jamal, a 19-year-old from Roxbury with an innovative idea for a property maintenance service. Watching him secure his first contract reminded me of my own early excitement and determination. "You know what the biggest thing is you've given me?" he told me one day. "It's not the connections, or even the startup funds. It's someone who believes I can do this." His words hit home. That's what I had lacked. Not money or opportunity, but people who believed in my vision. Aaron and I developed a new kind of brotherhood as adults. Without our parents' comparisons constantly driving a wedge between us, we discovered shared interests and perspectives. He eventually left his high-pressure corporate job to start a consulting practice with a more balanced approach to life, a decision our parents struggled to accept, but that I fully supported. "You showed me it was possible to define success on your own terms," he told me over dinner one evening. "I watched you build something meaningful while I was chasing promotions that never made me happy." My relationship with my grandmother Eleanor deepened as well. She had always treated Aaron and me equally, and now she took particular delight in my success. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she told me. "He was a businessman too, you know, self-made, like you." She shared stories about him that I'd never heard before, how he'd started with a small hardware store and gradually expanded to 3 locations, how he'd faced skepticism and setbacks but persevered. I saw echoes of my own journey in his, creating a connection across generations. Not every family relationship healed perfectly. My Aunt Judith and Uncle Thomas, who had been particularly dismissive of me while fawning over Aaron, never quite adjusted to my new status. Their congratulations seemed forced, their questions about my business perfunctory. I accepted this with equanimity, no longer needing their approval or interest. As for my portfolio, it continued to grow strategically rather than rapidly. By focusing on properties with potential for community improvement, as well as profit, I built a business with purpose beyond wealth accumulation. Today, 7 years after that turning point dinner, I own interests in 12 properties throughout Boston, with a total portfolio value exceeding $15 million. I employ a team of 20 people across property management, renovation, and acquisition divisions. My business partner Jackson, who took a chance on me when no one else would, is still by my side, though now in a consulting role as he edges toward retirement. The material trappings of success eventually came. A beautiful home in Beacon Hill not far from Aaron's, nice cars, the ability to travel whenever I choose. But these were secondary to the satisfaction of building something meaningful and proving to myself that I had the vision and determination my family couldn't see. The greatest gift of this journey wasn't financial independence or even professional accomplishment. It was learning to find worth within myself rather than seeking it from others, especially those unable or unwilling to see my potential. If you're watching this and feeling underestimated by family or friends, remember that their perception doesn't define your capabilities. Sometimes the people closest to us are the least able to envision who we might become because they're stuck seeing who we've been. Build anyway, work anyway, succeed anyway. Not to prove them wrong, although that satisfaction will come, but to prove yourself right. Have you ever been underestimated by family members who later had to change their tune? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, Please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences that might help you navigate your own path. Remember, sometimes the greatest motivation comes from those who don't believe in you. Use it as fuel for your journey, not a reason to give up. Thank you for listening to my story today. Wishing you all the success you deserve, whether others can see your potential or not.